You are listening to Salty Believer Unscripted, a conversation on Christian ministry and the Christian life. This is Salty Believer Unscripted. I'm Brian Catherman.
And I'm Josiah Walker.
And we are still doing the Zoom thing because I live in the heartland in the middle of nowhere and you are still in Salt Lake City. But here we are.
Hey, here we are.
Josiah, how you doing, man?
Technology. So, hey, I have some questions today that I want to ask you that I thought our listeners might appreciate. We got a phone call the other day from a friend. Just moved to a new town. Is trying to navigate through finding a new church and getting plugged in. He spent the last 10 years at his local church, so he's a little biased, trying to find something just like that. But what would you say to somebody who moved to a new town? How do you navigate that process of finding a new church home?
Well, I would definitely say hi to that guy because I think I know who you're talking about because he was in our church for 10 years.
Sure, it's a mutual friend.
Yes.
I won't put names out here, but yeah, we both know this guy.
I have to say I went through this a little bit. Now it's different coming out to Holdridge, Nebraska, small town,
Sure.
farm town. All the smaller farm towns around me are like, yeah, right, it's super small here. But, I was working at this church, but you're experiencing everything new. What does this look like? So when I came out even to meet with the people out here before I ever even said yes, I'd come. And I was looking at the church, trying to go, would I go to church here? And what would this look like? Which is a lot different than, hey, I've moved because I've taken a new job or something's come up, and now I have to find a church. I was actually asking, would I go for this church?
Sure.
So, first of all, I think it's fair to say that's a hard task. And it depends on where you are. Obviously, it's not going to be the same everywhere. If you go to some places, like places in Utah, you might only have one option. And It might not even be the denomination you were in before. It might not be you might not have another church to go to. We have another mutual friend who moved. They were for a while. They're not there now, but they were in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So they had to drive. I went and visited them, and I think we had to drive 30 or 40 minutes to pick up cheeseburgers, because everybody was just really spread out. They lived in the middle of nowhere, and their church options were really limited. So you have that kind of a situation. Then you have another situation where you show up, like maybe our other mutual friend, and there's 8 churches within 4 minutes of your house.
Yeah.
So I think before we even jump into what do you do to find the new church, we have to recognize every situation is not the same.
Right.
Circumstances are going to dictate how much you might want to look, how much you can live with and just be okay with for the sake of, I got to connect with brothers and sisters in Christ, but I might not have a bunch of luxury versus, hey, there's all these different churches. What do I do? So where would you like to start?
Yeah, let's start here. Let's say you move to a new town and there's 6 to 8 churches there.
All close by? All close reasonably by, close, you'd all go, okay.
5 minutes to 30 minutes away, you've got 6 to 8 options, both within your denomination, both outside of that, big, small, everything, right? You've got a variety. So do you go to every church 1 week at a time? Do you kind of look at those online and then pick one and go there for a couple months? How would you kind of go about that?
Here's what I would say for a Christian who's mature enough to be able to do this. Start with what you believe, really dial that in, and then do as much research as you can with these other churches to find out what most closely lines up with your beliefs. That's not what most people do. Most people go, hey, I'm going to go visit the church and see if they have coffee I like and if the music's good and whatever. But I don't think that's how you want to go, because if God is faithfully drawing you somewhere, you want to find the church that's going to line up with your beliefs well. So, for example, you're really serious about exegetical preaching from the Bible. Well, make sure that's what they do. Watch a service or two. If they have their services available live stream, watch one, or go back and look through the preaching. Look at their statement of faith or their confession and figure out where that lines up. Some churches just sort of go, oh, well, our statement of faith is the same as the denomination. Well, that could be loose, that could be tight, I don't know. But look at that. So figure out where you're at. If you've never really worked out your own faith statement, figure out the things that you're really adamant about. What are the hills you're going to die on, or what are things you can live with that might not fall closely within your beliefs? That's going to, because if you can't find, you're not likely going to find something that lines up perfectly with everything you believe, right? Because most churches, that's just not how it works. So you really want to start with what you believe and what the church confesses first. Yeah,
Sure.
because you don't go to a church that believes something completely different than what you believe. Don't even start. Don't even bother.
Right.
Right? I mean, you're not going
So
to do that church any favors.
I think that's fair. You want to find somebody that's close to what you believe. And, I say it all the time to the people at my church, drive to the church that's closest to the Bible, not the one that's closest to your house.
Which
Um,
that's if you believe that the Bible is what should lead and guide
right.
everything. But let's say you don't
So,
believe that. Like,
sure. But let's say I find a church and they really are the closest to what I believe, but they don't have a great kids program. I've got a lot of kids, and there's another church that kind of has a better kids program, but they're not quite aligned with what I believe. How do you kind of decide between those two?
that's going to depend on your priorities. If you really believe that it's the church's role to help with your kids program, your kids really need friends, and that's what's most important to you, and that's what you believe God is leading you to do, go to that church. However, it might be that God is leading you to help with the kids program at the other church. It might be that you show up and go, okay, this is going to be tough, but God's led us to this for a reason. It might be that it's not kids program. It might be that it's the musical worship. Like, I really don't love these songs. I like those songs, or I really like it this way or that way. And it
Yeah.
might be that it's, hey, they don't have a lot of Sunday school classes and I love Sunday school. Well, maybe you're there to help with that.
Right.
Maybe it really is going to depend, I think, in some levels on your maturity. Are you
Sure.
mature enough as a Christian to say, this is what I believe, this is what I know, and I'm going to participate in helping the ministry of the church?
Yeah.
Or are you one of the Christians that needs to be most helped by the ministry of the church? So, like,
Right.
if you don't have a lot of grounding and you're not really able to serve well, you might need to go to a place where you can be served well because you might not be patient enough with a church that needs help, right?
Right.
I can't tell you how many pastors I've talked to, and I've felt this myself, that they go, man, I don't know why this person is at this church. They want to change everything about the church. We don't believe all the same things they believe, and they're frustrated with everything. Well, that's not good for anybody. Don't go where
Sure.
you're going to be frustrated nonstop.
Right.
Go,
Yeah.
trust the Lord and trust that you're going to be led to a good fit. The kids program one or the music one or something like that is tough because you go down the street because they have a lot of kids, but the theology doesn't line up with what you believe. Well, how's that going to go in the big picture in the end when
Sure.
all your kids make friends and then something comes up and you go, you know what, our convictions have led us somewhere else?
Right.
That's tough. Or, God, Acts 17, God chooses the times and the places where we live so that people might feel their way to God. And maybe He chose your move. Maybe you got that new job in that new town. Maybe you moved to that new place for the purpose of plugging in and helping a church.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm thinking about these mutual friends that we've discussed. Even they showed up. I remember they showed up at our church just looking for, hey, what's good for me? They
Sure.
spend 5, 10 years with a church. They grow. Suddenly they're serving. They've matured. Now it's a whole different animal. So it's just different seasons of life, right?
And I think that's what can really complicate things is you sometimes come in with that consumer mentality of just wanting to be fed and what's best for your family. But as you grow and mature under the preached word, you find yourself kind of looking for a different church than you were 10 years ago. So
Right.
let's add a little hypothetical. Let's add another layer to this situation. I'm moving to a new town, but I actually have family in that town already. I've grown, I'm pretty mature in my faith, but my family members, they're kind of shallow. So they're going to one of those kind of shallow, kind of mainstream type churches. And they say, hey, we just assumed you're going to come join us at our church here in town. How do
Oof.
you navigate that?
That's a tough conversation because that's going to really have a lot to do with two things. That can go a couple different ways. We're going to maybe choose to go to church with this family so we can connect with them and help them grow, help them be edified in Christ, and maybe help them along, maybe. Or it might be that you have a conversation and you say, hey, we love that you go to this church. Praise the Lord you attend church at all and you're a Christian,
Sure.
but we really think we want to go to try such and such church down the street. Maybe you could come with us and just help us. And yeah, it might just be a conversation. And now that might not go well. Sometimes families get really frustrated by those things, but that's going to be a family dynamic. But the key is how you view going to church. Do you
Right.
come to church because it's what you do on a Sunday and it's your social activity and, well, that was fun, I could kind of take it or leave it, but if I'm free I'm going to go? Or is it because you're showing up to deeply worship, connect, and praise the Lord with God's people, and Sunday's vitally important? Now, it's hard because you might come from a church that has that kind of view, and you end up at a church where they don't have quite the same views. And you have to wrestle with, why has God put me here? What is my involvement with this church? How do I walk through this? You might look back on your church you left with rose-colored glasses and everything's perfect. I got to admit,
Yeah.
like, I left Redeeming Life, where you're still at.
Sure.
I'm now in the heartland, out in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska, and there are times when I go, oh man, back where I came from, it was like this, and then I have to go, no, wait, pause, hold on a sec. No, we still had some of those issues, and you want to put on rose-colored glasses of your previous church, and that doesn't help you connect with your new church.
Well, and that's another good question too, is how do you kind of transition out of your old church? Your friends are there, maybe you follow that church on Facebook. Would you advise somebody maybe take a break or hide some things, or how do you kind of transition well through that?
I think that's going to depend on each person. For me, I actually took, for a couple reasons, I'll just share it. I told you, Josiah, when I was leaving, and I was a lead pastor, and you were stepping into my shoes there,
Sure.
that really need to be your own shoes. And so I didn't want you thinking that I was watching everything that was going on, and I didn't. So I told you, okay, I'm going to take 3 months, and I'm not gonna watch a sermon. I'm not gonna drop in and pay attention to everything going on in social media. And at first, I thought that was to do you a favor. But in the big picture, I had to sever some of those deep ties, because every Sunday, I'm working at Trinity, and it's a great group of people, and we're doing all sorts of different things, but I was feeling this loss from my faith family in Utah, right?
Yeah.
So actually, it was good for me to sort of force myself not to just every Sunday go back to that and continually compare that church to this church and think about all my memories. And it was hard. I felt so disconnected, but I think that forced me to drive into connections here in my new faith family, which,
Sure.
everybody's going to be different about that. Now, 3 months passed, I jumped back on, I'm watching a sermon here and there, but that 3 months really helped me connect here. So now
Sure.
I kind of have the best of both worlds, but
I think that's helpful in any transition. I've seen where I've had to quit one job and start another job, and you have friends at your old job, and you just kind of need to maybe not go around there or follow their social media pages just to help transition, because there's going to be things you miss about the former place.
I'll tell you
So,
what's really hard is when the former place had certain things that were going great, and the
yeah,
place you go, that's just a disaster. And you just want to be like, oh, well, everything was great over here. And you have to remember,
right,
maybe not everything was great, but it is hard. So you're looking for that church, and the temptation is to compare everything to where you just left. But circumstances are different, and God's doing different things, and you want to be careful. Now, you don't just want to go, well, I'm not going to compare, so I'm just going to go to
right.
this heretical church over here that doesn't do
Sure.
anything, I believe. You don't want that. But you want to be careful, because there are plenty of things where I'm at right now that I think Redeeming Life definitely had a really solid handle on, and I miss it.
Sure.
But there are
Sure.
other things here that I'm like, oh man, we could never really could get this off the ground the way we wanted at
Right.
Redeeming Life, and wow, look at this here at Trinity. And so you just want to be careful not to do the comparison between those churches.
And how do you kind of prioritize those things where you leave a church that was really great at some things? So you go to a new church and there's some things that are maybe a little quirky, or maybe that you've just never thought through before. Let's say maybe the coffee's not as good, or they don't have as many fellowship groups, or how do you kind of prioritize, okay, these are really important and these aren't as important?
That's been pretty tricky, because there's been a couple things here where I'm at definitely has different priorities than where I came from. And where I came from didn't exactly match every one of my priorities. We had things that we were
Sure.
working on, but I had to sort of say, okay, what are the very top priorities?
Right.
What can I be a part of? I don't have to change the whole church, but what can I do to just do the part that God has called me to do while I'm here? Hey, this is important, so I'm going to make that important. I'm going to prioritize that in my own life, even if the church doesn't prioritize that. So it's really just a matter of sitting down. You might need to get out a piece of paper, say, what are the top things? And
Yeah.
how many of the top things does this church have that are also my priorities? And what are the things that are just, you know, I there's things that are going to be at both churches where I was at, or let's say these friends that have gone to other churches. You're going to find things that go, whoa, our old church would have never done that. Or
Right.
maybe, whoa, our old church actually couldn't afford to do that. Or
Sure.
maybe, hey, we hadn't even thought about that. Man, why
Yeah.
didn't we think about that? That's a
Sure.
great idea, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh man, we didn't do that at the other church. Some of it's just different circumstances, different giftings, different dynamics of people. Some of the stuff we did in Utah, there's no way that we would do some of the things that we do where I'm at in Nebraska, because just the community would have seen that quite a bit differently, and it wouldn't have fit the context of where we're at. And then there's things that they do here that I'm like, okay, that's just a cultural thing to do. Okay, but again, what are the most important things? What are the top things? I'll tell you, it's been really convenient for me. My first assignment when I got here to the new church was the church here had used the denominational faith statement, which was fine. It's an EFCA, it's a free church deal, but we had certain distinctives that we wanted to drill down into that were a little more specific. And I'm working for the pastor who I used to work for a long time ago before he church planted, in whom I helped write the faith statement along with Jared Jenkins, who's been on the program. And then we adopted that faith statement at Redeeming Life. And then lo and behold, my first task was, let's talk through this and see where this church is. So we present that, and then I'll go, wow, that's pretty good. And now I'm like, wow, the faith statements are the same faith statement. So praise the Lord. That was the top priority. Not that they had to be identical, but like, is this church really going to believe the same way I do? And lo and behold, we have the same confession now, and they've adopted that. And so praise the Lord. There are lots of other things. I got to just work on those things. Got to think about them. Got to be okay with them. Got to look the other way occasionally and go, I'm going to pretend I didn't see that one, or whatever.
And I think that's helpful to remember, is that your old church didn't do everything perfect, and every church is figuring things out, and every context is different. So you find a church, you do the work ahead of time to check out their websites, maybe watch a few sermons. You pick a church, you start going there. How long do you really go there before you say, okay, this is the church, or maybe I'll try a different one? Or, how long do you go before you really get plugged in and say, okay, I'm going to invest in this?
I remember a couple of seasons in my life where that was, I've had seasons where you knew people at a church that helped, but I was in the military, didn't have my family with me, it was just me, and I was in Colorado, and I was in Colorado Springs, where there's, a large abundance of Christian churches. And I remember going, okay, it's Sunday morning, I'm going to try this church. My plan initially was I'm going to try churches that are closest to me, because I just didn't think through, like, I should probably check. It's like, okay, there's that one, then just down the road, there's another one. So I go to the first church, and it's like nowhere near anything I'm accustomed to, because it was like, it was so far outside of might have been a Lutheran church or something. I don't even know. I was like, whoa, this is way not what I thought I was getting into. And I wasn't a pastor then, and I didn't have a lot of maturity, but I could tell from minute one. I walked in the lobby, the service hadn't even started. I could have turned around and left and been fine, but I didn't. I decided to stick it out. I'm like, this is just not going to be it. I knew.
Sure.
Then I went down the road to a couple other churches. Okay, these are kind of very similar to what I came from, and this is okay. Seems like a good group. Okay, this is cool. And I went to that church for 3 or 4 weeks, and over time, it just wasn't quite. I didn't know. And then I dropped into another church, and like the first week, I didn't really like it, but I went back the second week, and something kind of clicked, and then that's where I ended up going for the few months that I was there.
Yeah.
You kind of know, would I come back, not come back? When I was on my sabbatical, I went to a couple of churches, and it was like, would this be the church? You just pray about it. You ask the Lord, hey, guide us. Where's the faith family you would have us connect with, worship with, serve with, and hope that you would know. But I would advise not putting some rigid, strict plan, like we're going to go to. I remember people came and visited. They said, oh, we love this church so much, and we wish we could just stay, except we made a commitment to go to 26 churches before we chose a church. Well, don't do that, right? Like,
No, I think it's fair to be honest, too. Like, a lot of times, we don't want to come across as a jerk, but I really just compare this to dating or relationships, because it is a relationship. It's a relationship between you and the rest of the church, and if you've got to navigate that. I've had visitors come to our church and say, no, this is awesome, and I said, well, if you don't love it, let me know. I know a lot of other great churches. No, we're going to be back. And then I never saw them.
And they don't come back anymore. Like, just be honest.
As a pastor, would you be offended if someone had questions about your church or said, hey, I'm not really sure?
I always appreciated that. Like, hey, we were trying to figure this out. Can you help me with this or with that? And why do you guys do this? Or, hey, how often do you, we haven't seen a baptism. How often do you see baptisms here? What about this? Or what about, like, okay, so you're the lead pastor at Redeeming Life now. Someone shows up and they've been coming for 2 weeks. Are you comfortable with them wanting to become members of the church and being involved in all? You kind of go, well, hang out for a little bit, right?
Right?
You know,
No, I've had those conversations. I said, well, let's talk about that more, and really look at what that looks like. So what do you do? What if you do if you go somewhere and you love it, but your spouse hates it?
so my wife came out of Mormonism, and when we first started attending churches, now I wasn't a believer, and she had just come out of Mormonism. She wanted something that had really that very um, kind of subdued feeling like she came out of with the Mormon ward. And at that time in
Yeah,
my life, the only churches I'd ever really experienced had, like kind of big worship, the pastors wearing jeans and maybe a polo shirt or something, and that made me feel
sure.
comfortable. Ironically,
Yeah,
over time, I came to a point where I kind of liked uh, the more hymns, and I kind of
sure.
shifted over time. And now I'm back at a church that has like a giant band, and I don't know
Yeah.
if everybody would, they'd probably die if I wore a suit, but well, I should do that. I should try that.
Yeah, mix
Anyway,
it up.
but at the time, my wife was like really uncomfortable if there was any kind of loud music, if there was coffee in the lobbies. Almost every church we were going to was offering coffee, and she was really frustrated by that. And
Yeah,
so we visited a lot of churches, and we had to find a place we could both connect okay. And we
sure.
eventually found that place. And then over time, things changed for both of us. We found places. So I would say, have honest conversations with your
Yeah,
spouse and
right.
decide, what are we going to do? We had a couple that came to Redeeming Life, and he loved it and she hated it. And I think
Sure.
she was pretty, like, she's told us over the years, like,
Yeah,
I was like, I never
yeah,
want to come back here. And
for
yet she
sure.
said, I'm going to submit to my husband on this one
Yeah,
because he's happy with it, and that's important to me. And it turned out she absolutely loved the church. I remember when they moved, they
sure.
was crying and it was horrible,
Yeah,
right? Like, and that happens a lot. Like, you got to talk through that. Might be that your spouse doesn't even want to go to church, and it's just a
yeah.
blessing they come to church. So you might want to be okay with, if they find something they're comfortable with, deciding, okay, I can live with this for a while and let's see what happens. It's a matter of how you're going to talk through that. I mean, there's no perfect science to any of this.
Right. I was going to say there's definitely no one size fits all. Here's the criteria for finding a new church because it's different in every area. It's different in every relationship, and so I think really blanketing that kind of process through prayer, and conversations, honest conversations with the pastor, honest conversations with your spouse and your kids.
Well, and sometimes you show up and you might have just shown up on the one Sunday when they had the worst disaster of, oh, our soundboard was broken and we had the one guest preacher and this thing and that thing, and let's say you never come back, you don't even
Right.
know. Or maybe they're in a, like, so you're in a situation right now where you're looking at some transition. You're looking to hire a new associate pastor who can lead worship because the one you had is moving on and is moving home and taking care of family and some stuff. So here you have people showing up and they can't outright see what the new worship person is going to be like. And on the one
Yeah.
hand, they might say, well, I don't like that, I'm leaving. But on the other
Right.
hand, they might have an opportunity to kind of walk with the new guy, be a part of the process. So it could be, depending on, again, the maturity of the Christian, is this an opportunity to be involved in something new and starting kind of fresh with everybody with this thing? That could be good. Maybe it's not so
Sure.
good for you. So,
And
like,
I
you got to work through that.
And that's hard too because you might go to a church that's in that similar boat. Let's say you go and you find out the worship pastor's leaving. Well, this isn't going to be the church for us. Who knows how that's going to be? Maybe stick with them for a little bit or try come back in a little bit. Keep an eye on them, see what's going on. Because you're right. You're like if you come the one week the youth pastor's preaching and it's his first time or whatnot, that's not really a
Right.
good assessment. So while you said you can't really put a stringent like go to a church 6 weeks before you look at another one, really have some flexibility there.
Yeah.
You know,
See,
and I think
it's kind of like dating, right? Who puts
right.
really super strict rules on, this is how I'm going to
Oh,
find a spouse. I'm going to date 16 women 12 times, and I'm going to, or here's the one time, and you feel it out. It's more of an art than it is a science. Okay. I might want to keep dating this person. All right, cool. Let's go on a second date and see how it goes. Right.
And I think you need to leave yourself the option of, how do I want to put this? You might be surprised at the church you walk into. Because from the outside, we look like a pretty traditional church. We have a stained glass window and a little marquee where you can change the words on it every
And a big
week
steeple.
and a big steeple. And so I don't look like the hip, cool, fun church. And so I've had people walk by my church down the street to go to a different church that maybe looks a little more contemporary. And then they've not had a great experience there and said, actually, let's go and let's try this church and fallen in love with it and liked it. So, You might be pleasantly surprised when you go to a church and go, I don't know. And then you get there and you realize you actually really like it.
Well, and that's the case for like sometimes big church, small church.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd like to go to a big church. You might find that there's a big church that, wow, that was great. Or a small church, or
Yeah.
maybe a church in slightly different denomination that's close to the same beliefs that
Yeah.
you held. Like, I mean, you never really know, right?
Some people will go to a big church because they, don't want to connect. They want to be able to just sneak in. But then after a while, they feel like, well, I can't connect with anybody. I don't have any friends. And so then they go to a small church. You just never know. So,
Or they
how,
think you can't connect at a big church, or they show up at a big church and meet their best friend. Like,
right?
you know?
Who knows? But let's say you go and you're connecting and you're enjoying it and maybe you're helping out or you've been plugged in there for a while. How do you know when it's the right time to kind of look at becoming a member at that church and really
Some of that
commit?
is probably going to depend on how the church views membership and how you view membership. But I would say having conversations with the leadership, asking what they think is a good, what does it mean to be a member here? What does
Yeah.
that look like? When you're to the point where you say, look, we're not looking around for another church. We feel pretty good about the mission, the purpose, the efforts, the values, the things this church is doing. We want to take ownership. Like, we don't want to, we're not making excuses for our church, and we're not embarrassed about our church. This is our church. I think that's the time when you want to really talk about that. But I would say don't rush that, because I
Sure.
can't remember how many times, like, hey, we've been here 2 weeks and we want to be members. Well, you don't have to be a member of a church immediately to be plugging in at that church. At most churches, I don't know of any church where
Yeah.
you'd have to
You
immediately
know,
be a member or you're out.
Absolutely not. Here at Redeeming Life, at the church I pastor, there are certain roles in the church, certain service opportunities where you do have to be a member because I need to be able to affirm that you agree with our faith statement.
But
But there
hold
are
on.
also,
You're not putting the person who's been coming for 2 weeks in any of those roles, though, right?
right,
Like,
I'm not.
hey,
So, but with that being said, there are a lot of opportunities where people can serve as just a regular attender here at the church who's been coming for a few months, but maybe hasn't become a member yet. So, there's some flexibility there for sure.
we're running out of time, but I'll leave one more. I'll leave one more thing out there to think about. And I remember I'm probably guilty of doing this. You show up at a church and you only go to the service, and you try
Mm,
to make a lot of evaluation at the service, but there might be some
sure.
value in going to some of the other
Yeah.
activities and just saying,
Yeah.
hey, we're just exploring. We just don't know if we want to, join. We don't know what we want to do at the church, but we thought we'd just come and try out a small group, or we
Yeah.
thought we'd come to the church barbecue and just see what it's like, because that
Yeah.
might give you some more insight as to what's going to stick around a little bit before and after the service. See what that looks like. There's a lot more pieces going on that are definitely worth taking a good look at. So I would just encourage, as people are doing this, not to overthink it, not to put too much pressure on it, but just trust the Lord in it and pray, and then just kind of keep seeing. It's obviously not an easy task, or we wouldn't even be having this podcast, but
Right.
give it a try, right?
At the very least, give it a try. Get plugged into a local church because, as Hebrews 10:25 says, it's important for us to gather together. So when you move somewhere, go to church.
That's a really good last word. Hey, but I want to throw one little commercial out there. So you're looking for an associate pastor who can also lead worship at
That's right.
Redeeming Life Church in
Yeah.
Bountiful at the time of this podcast, which is November, 2024.
Yeah.
They can find information at redeeminglifeutah.org. You got a blog post with all the
Yep.
details, good salary. So if you know anybody who's looking at being a kind of a missionary pastor, potentially like a church planter type, being able to maybe preach once in a while, lead once in a while. I'm just throwing this whole commercial out. Am I hitting all the
I
pieces?
appreciate it.
And
Yeah,
can
absolutely.
lead in congregational worship, so like
Yeah.
playing a guitar or piano or something. All right, I just want to encourage people to go check that out. RedeemingLifeUtah.org has all the info. Until next time. Thanks for listening. Salty Believer Unscripted is a production of SaltyBeliever.com. Visit the website to find more resources like the podcast you've just listened to.